Welcome to another exciting episode of Count Me In. Today we have a special guest with us, Janis Parthun, VP Advisory and Project Services at RGP. She is an expert in the field of environmental social governance, or ESG as many of us know it. Janis brings a wealth of knowledge, providing a fresh perspective on the complexities and significance of ESG. She will walk us through the intricacies of ESG, discuss its growing prominence, and share valuable insights on its implementation. So if you're looking to understand ESG better and how it can add value to your business model, this is one episode you won't want to miss. Let's dive right in. Janis, we're really excited to have you on the Count Me In podcast. As we go into today, we're going to be talking about ESG, or environmental, social, and governance. And we hear a lot about that. IMA talks a lot about that. We've been publishing articles. There's a lot of things happening in the industry. But maybe we can start off just at a higher level and talk about, what does it mean? What does it represent in an organization?
Yeah, Adam, happy to do that. The term ESG, or environmental, social, and governance, can really differ just depending on who you speak to, but I'd like to establish some initial background here, where environmental focuses on the company's impact on the environment, on the risks and opportunities associated with the impact of climate change on the company, its business, and its industry. Social may focus on the company's relationship with people and society, or whether the company's investing in its community. And governance focuses on issues such as how the company is run and possibly connect to executive compensation. So ESG has been an important element to organizations' approach to create value as part of the business model and just to the greater society impact. But what does this entail is what I often hear. And to elaborate a little bit more, a company's overarching ESG program will likely have top priorities determined around ESG matters, with goals, which includes metrics and possibly targets for future outlook set and established. To reach the goals and the targets, the company may have various initiatives in action in order to support the goals. For example, a company may have a climate change as one of its ESG priorities or material topics, and a goal to reduce emissions with a target of 40% by 2040. The organization then may have an initiative or project to convert all its transportation fleets to electric vehicles as a strategy to reduce the emissions. But when we're discussing ESG at the overarching program or program level, this is applicable across multiple material topics or priority topics. Now, the topic of ESG is not new, and there are significant funds and investments around this. Currently, over 96% of the SP 500 already voluntarily publish sustainability reports in some form or fashion. But the increasing interest from parties to invest and companies wanting to communicate and report on ESG, regulatory and standard-setting bodies are also paying attention to how companies are reporting on ESG matters.
Definitely. And you see a lot of the bigger organizations implementing it, but small organizations may not quite be ready or there yet. And if you are one of those organizations that's saying, you know what, I want to jump into this, get into this, what are some steps that a typical company might undergo to establish an ESG type program? Is there a specific strategic approach that you need to take when you're implementing that?
Yes, no, that's a great point, Adam. And there is a recommended strategic approach to this. So the other aspect to think about is the ESG strategic roadmap, or steps that companies typically may undergo to establish an ESG program. First is really having to determine materiality. This is driven by stakeholder and market input, industry profile, business strategy, and suggested standards and frameworks. And then setting goals and targets and execute on the reporting. So establishing process and oversight to have that accountability and report or update related to performance metrics. And then establishing quality control, establish process and governance to ensure the quality control of the data that's collected or reported. And of course, reevaluate in that cycle. But, more often than not, companies are encountering challenges during the midpoint stages of executing on the ESG program strategy. And this includes adhering to regulations, standards, and frameworks, and just trying to stay current and up to date. There are several in the horizon, and it's a lot going on for companies to navigate through. Program management and governance, having organizational governance over the ESG program, and monitoring and tracking against existing goals appropriately and evaluating progress. For example, do you have governance process around adding or revising priorities or metrics and monitoring the actions? Or involve an ESG committee that helps govern the goals set and tracked. And data quality management. Is the information reliable? For example, is the information collected comprehensive to the metrics being tracked, such as inclusive the various regions and markets? Is the information reliable, such as is it trackable or includes supporting details? And with each of these challenges, it's important to pull the right resources in to help and address.
Before we get too much into the details of like program management and those challenges, you've mentioned a few times about different regulating bodies have been watching in certain areas, there are regulations and new standards coming up, and that can be challenging for anybody. And a lot of people are overworked, people are getting stressed out, and the idea of having more regulations to follow can be very, stress inducing. But maybe you can talk a little bit more about how it's affecting companies and what people can expect.
Yes, I can definitely elaborate that a little bit more, Adam, and dive a little bit deeper from a regulatory driver perspective. And you're so right on this. And there's such an increasing scrutiny just on how companies are presenting the ESG related information, as well as the push to reduce the climate impact to the environment, that multiple regulatory authorities are pushing their agendas. And that's what's creating all this pressure too. For US public companies, the pressure is coming from the SEC, with the biggest proposal on climate-related disclosures announced last year to disclose governance, strategy, risk management, and targets on the climate impact, and specifically greenhouse gas emissions. And there are multiple elements within the proposal that's creating concerns for many public companies, especially around disclosing climate-related financial impact and Scope 3 emissions. I think by the time this recording is released, the SEC will likely announce an update and issue possibly a reduced scope version of the original proposal. It is a lot to ask for companies to disclose on those areas. And this is just one specific proposal. And there are several other SEC proposals anticipated to finalize in the horizon this year as well, beyond the climate-related disclosures. And in the EU, the pressure is coming from the EU Commission. The Commission recently adopted a new rule late last year, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or CSRD, for companies to publish detailed information on sustainability matters to increase the company's accountability and to prevent divergent sustainability standards. This is a pretty big ask since there are 12 standards drafted with 10 specific ESG topics, spanning from climate to workforce to business conduct. And this may also impact a US company if the company has subsidiaries in the EU market. And there are also country jurisdictional specific requirements to consider that I won't mention here because there's just a lot to capture. But beyond reporting, the EU is also proposing another new rule to streamline information about companies' environmental performance of products and to reduce misleading claims. So just to add one more thing to this, related to all this, is that companies are also increasingly being asked to communicate and report information that's understandable across a broad base of investor community. So more so around voluntary standards. And this is happening through recognized standards and frameworks for comparability. And there are a number of them as well. So the top two standards that are frequently referred to is SASB and GRI, but there are also others, each with the specific mission. And again, this is just a lot for companies to get a handle of and stay on top of. And I just wanted to at least share a little bit of the landscape of the different type of requirements or voluntary type of disclosures. And then interesting enough, so just to highlight or illustrate a little bit. So for example, we at RGP had helped one of our clients on a related issue last year. The Task Force for Climate Related Financial Disclosure, or TCFD, issued new recommendations in October 2021. And the client needed to understand the degree of the changes, as well as consider how this impacts the client's reporting to another global environmental disclosure system, the CDP, in connection to the TCFD changes. So that's just one example, but the reporting information can also be interconnected across the requirements.
That's really interesting. And I think, as you're going into this process, either get some help or, make sure you're staying on top of that or finding an organization that can help you stay on top of those standards and help understand it better, because depending where your organization is, will be which standards you have to follow, obviously. So we've talked about the standards and the different regulations, and I think you've got a very good overview of that for the audience. But you mentioned aspects of program management and governments. Outside of the keeping up with the standards and regulations, you have to actually manage the program. Maybe you can talk about some what you have seen where companies are on track, where they're not on track, and maybe give some best practices.
Yeah, happy to do so, Adam. And so it's a great point to bring up. So I've seen companies where they're really leading the pack and companies where they're falling short on their ESG commitments to their stakeholders. Now, in terms of companies where they're really on track and where they're not, industries that are ahead of the curve in ESG reporting are in consumer products and real estate, and for good reasons. So for consumer products, recent studies show that consumers are shifting their spending towards products with ESG-related claims, and products making ESG-related claims have averaged higher cumulative growth over a 5-year period. This is a major reason that consumer product companies are pushing to be ahead of the curve in ESG initiatives and to report on ESG commitments. Chipotle is one setting a good example recently. The company announced that its 2023 ESG goals will be linked to executive incentive compensation, impacting its 2023 annual incentive bonus by 15%. So making that commitment to set the goals and hold its people accountable to achieve the goals is a great example. For real estate, considering there's a significant emission generation from the real estate value chain, ESG is now a top risk priority for the industry. And CBRE is one setting a good example. When the company entered into a new 5-year revolving credit agreement last year to increase its revolving credit facility, it linked the agreement with achieving certain sustainability goals, such as to provide procurement spending with sustainable suppliers, to converting vehicle fleet to electric vehicles. But there are instances where the companies are using ESG to promote and market products misleadingly. And this is a lesson learned for one retail company last year on what may happen when your organization lacks the program governance and the structure to manage the ESG initiatives and the integrity of the data reported. In this instance, the apparel company was investigated by regulators for misleading sustainability-related products and had to remove the labels from their products and websites. I mean, the company really broke the brand promise of offering sustainable apparel. It's clear that there's consumer demand for more eco-friendly products. But again, this is where the regulators are stepping in. And the European Commission had recently highlighted that over 50% examined environmental claims in an EU study conducted were found to be vague, misleading, or unfounded. And because of this, the Commission had since proposed a rule that I just had mentioned earlier to address. And companies are lagging behind in ESG reporting, are more likely in the IT or healthcare industry, with less direct customer or consumer pressures, or just have other pressures to take priority, such as COVID-19 in the past few years. And companies may also have other external pressures, such as having to obtain capital, for example. From a mergers and acquisition perspective, a number of studies indicate that senior management suggests they are willing to pay premiums to purchase companies with positive ESG records. ESG is also influencing capital raising process. For example, this year, credit ratings agency Fitch Ratings announced plans to use its climate vulnerability scores to enhance the process to consider credit-relevant climate-related risk for its corporate credit ratings for non-financial attributes. So, with the increasing demands by stakeholders, companies may wonder how they can establish or elevate to a solid ESG program and governance. To start, it's about understanding your priorities based on your industry profile and business model. Because once the priorities are established, organizations can drill down further, understand what specific metric goals and targets are relevant, and integrate these activities to the business strategy. With all this, having a structured, more formal ESG program with governance structure can help set clear strategic goals and expectations that are recognizable by a broader audience and hold management and internal stakeholders more accountable. Whether public or private organization, just having structure can really help better communicate ESG efforts and progress to the community, to creditors, or investors at large.
Janis, as you were giving that answer, one thing that really stuck out to me is data quality. And as we in the accounting world know how important your data is and having numbers in the right place and reporting accurate numbers. And I know that there are concerns around the quality of data in ESG information that is reported, and you made some examples of people not giving that accurate thing, especially in how they're marketing things. What can companies do to address these types of issues?
Yes, it's a great point to have our discussion. Yes, data quality is a significant concern for companies. And the concerns used to be more around the data collection and the availability of the information. But now companies are getting more comfort around what information is available, I think just through understanding and research. And it's been shifting more focused on the data quality or the completeness and the accuracy of the data collected, calculated, and reported out. And there's been increasing focus on the data quality with a number of our clients in preparation, more so for future assurance. And this is an increasing trend that's also being observed at the board level. According to a recent research or recent survey conducted with corporate directors, over 50% of public company director respondents indicated that the higher quality of ESG information is being presented to the board, but then with a lower percentage and less progress for private companies. To address the concerns or focus area, companies are seeing how they can improve the quality through building internal control structure to ESG data. And, interesting and timely enough, the IMA also recently issued a publication, Achieving Effective Internal Control over Sustainability Reporting, that I think it directly speaks to having effective control and oversight to that ESG information to have that high quality and fit for purpose for decision making. This publication is really resourceful. It's providing an overarching regulatory landscape and incorporating the COSO internal control framework. I'd say also at RGP, we've also built a consultation approach on this for our clients, incorporating the COSO internal controls framework so that we can be able to help guide the clients to be able to add control structure and improve the reliance of ESG related information. Now, another strategy is around automation for the data collection and reporting systems. And while I don't necessarily think there's one true solution leader yet, but there are definitely tools currently out there in the market to help address either at the initial collection process to the generation of the report or disclosures. And there are definitely a few that are more prominent. But I do think that the platforms are maturing. There will likely be a leader on this as the platforms mature. But it's also important to consider what systems you can leverage within your organization. You'll want to think about what system or combination of systems can also be able to help you trace all the way through.
Definitely. And, and depending what systems, as you can tell, as we talk about ESG, it applies across multiple functions within an organization. But who are we in IMA podcast to not talk about the finance and controllership function within an organization? What role does the finance team provide in the ESG reporting ecosystem?
Well, Adam, within the finance organization, historically, controllership functions are familiar with implementing new reporting requirements, working across multiple stakeholders, and at the same time, bring that structure and that rigor to the process outcome. And this can be similarly said about the FP&A function as well, or the reporting and analysis role, leveraging the same expertise to apply to ESG reporting. I really see the future role of accounting and finance professionals to be ranging from the orchestrator to the gatekeeper of the ESG programs, depending on the industry and the business model of the organization. If the company is more focused on addressing risk, finance may likely play a more significant role as an orchestrator versus if the focus is on supply chain, operations, or sustainability office, more likely would be the orchestrator, while finance is the gatekeeper for the reported information. But regardless of which spectrum of the role the finance organization fulfills, one definitive rule is to be the partner, working collaboratively alongside other functions. I have seen similar experience and value translate from financial reporting to ESG reporting. Besides staying on top of regulatory updates, finance and accounting professionals can also provide process and governance structure to sustainability reporting. This includes developing standard processes for data collection with associated reviewers and workflows with sign-off functions, to building similar support structure, such as a SharePoint site for one centralized communication of requirements, such as with dates, processes, sources, and training. The same attributes apply to operational reporting, as organizations are setting goals and targets to monitor and work across multiple stakeholders. Finance professionals can also bring that structure and the rigor to process outcome. The shift towards the future role and change can really be accomplished through guidance development and education. Companies in more mature stages of reporting are developing guidance and typically expected from the finance organizations to enhance policies and procedures that adds to the structure and the rigor. But there are still many organizations not at that mature stage. And this is where education and training is key, to educate finance and accounting professionals to be the partners to the ESG reporting ecosystem. The other aspect to consider is to educate the process or data owners who may not have been previously involved from regulatory reporting or audit perspective, to be able to strive for and achieve for that level of detail and that quality of information expected. And as finance and internal control functions are increasingly getting involved, we at RGP are also developing the project methodology and an ESG training program to educate our consulting team on ESG reporting. And it's really, this is really to upskill our talent base and to be able to anticipate for our client need and to be better prepared.
That's awesome. And sounds like you're doing great work. And I think those are some great insights. And we've covered a lot during this podcast. And maybe to finalize things, maybe you can give a summary of some of the final thoughts that you want our listeners to remember as they walk away.
Yeah, no, happy to. And I think there's just, a key point I want to emphasize is that now there are many more external pressures and expectations to consider when companies are issuing sustainability reports. And it's important to bring in the right people to either implement and manage or to improve the ESG program. And this includes bringing in finance and accounting professionals who can be a valuable partner working collaboratively alongside other functions. I am personally passionate about this topic, but more importantly, how much value our finance and accounting profession can bring, to a company's sustainability program. We should advocate more for this role and just provide the guidance associated to support the profession. And that's really my last point I want to emphasize. So thank you, Adam, for having me on this podcast. And I'm very excited about the future developments to come related to sustainability reporting.
Yes. Thank you so much, Janis, for coming on. We really appreciate you sharing your insight with the audience.
This has been Count Me In, IMA's podcast, providing you with the latest perspectives of thought leaders from the accounting and finance profession. If you like what you heard and you'd like to be counted in for more relevant accounting and finance education, visit IMA's website at www.imanet.org.